I'll oftentimes just, instead of just saying, oh no, you're doing great, I'll try and give them a really concrete example of how we all feel that way. And it always passes. And if someone says, well, I could try this and I could fail, I'm like, you could, and you probably will some of the time. That's part of the deal.
Hey everyone, before we get started, we just want to give you a heads up about our next spring registration event for our upcoming season of coaching groups. That's happening tomorrow, Wednesday, February 28th at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. If you want to join us this spring, go now to coachingrewired.com so you can start your pre-registration process to join us for our next registration event happening tomorrow, Wednesday, February 28th at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 Eastern. When you join us for our registration events, we'll be around to answer some of your questions about our coaching groups and to help you get registered. Join us in the spring.
It all has helped me be more comfortable with who I am.
I realized in this group that my husband and I of 30 years had not talked about our future or our plans, and we actually sat down and did that. That's a big deal.
That's coachingrewired.com to get started. More at the break. And now, on with the show. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. Today's guest is Justine Clay. Justine is a speaker, writer, business coach, and ADHD coach for creative entrepreneurs and freelancers. Using her actionable, profitable by design framework, Justine helps established creative professionals and business owners identify and articulate their unique value, position themselves to high quality, well-paying clients, and build a fulfilling, efficient, and profitable creative business. Welcome to the podcast, Justine.
Thank you for having me, Eric. I'm delighted to be here.
So you are a mom of a kiddo who has ADHD, is that correct?
That's right.
And you are neurotypical yourself.
I am, and I know that makes me unusual for one of your guests.
So what does a coach who is neurotypical, who is a mom of a ADHD kid, what unique perspective do you bring to the table to help those who are, maybe entrepreneurs or creatives? How do you help people?
So I've worked with creatives for 20 plus years, and I would say it wasn't until I had a neurodivergent child that I sort of realized, oh, I've probably been working with neurodivergent people all along and not really known it. So when you don't know specifically what you're dealing with, you don't have, strategies, tools, even just ways to kind of check yourself, right? And say, am I assuming anything here? And so I would say that as a person who supports creative people, I've always had kind of a grab bag of tools, and I've realized that's really necessary. I would say that, having my kid and sort of, I'd say probably diagnosis onwards, that really helped me realize, oh, there are a very distinct ways that people think. There are very distinct ways that people process. There are very distinct ways that people take action. And there's no one right way and there's no wrong way. And one of the things I realized, which is kind of like one of the ugly truths, is that neurotypicals oftentimes think their way is the right way. So I would say that that's the sort of the unique blend that I would bring to it, is that I know and have a level of awareness around myself that I didn't have before. And as such, I can kind of partner with the folks that I'm working with in a much more, I suppose, aware way.
So when you're working, everyone with ADHD is a little bit different.
Yep.
So how do you help entrepreneurs sort of navigate what they're trying to do in their business and how their ADHD sort of intersects with their business? How do you sort of identify what those challenges are?
I think a lot of times, honestly, it's listening and reading between the lines or hearing between the lines, I think, because there are a lot of folks that I work with who definitely identify as creatives. And I don't know that they identify as neurodivergent, but I'm hearing them and I'm like, I think this person may have ADHD. And of course, I would never say that. But, I think a lot of it is just my own sort of like listening for things. So, for example, there's a creative business conference that's happening this summer in New York City. And I spoke to the person who's the founder of the conference. And we jumped on a Zoom call, just like you and I did. And he started the conversation right away with just jumping into lots and lots of different thoughts about AI and this and that, and nothing to do with what we were supposed to be talking about. And I was just listening and listening and listening. And as we were talking, he said, well, let me check out your website. And he goes and he checks it out and he says, oh, you're an ADHD coach. And he says, I wonder if I have ADHD. I wonder if maybe I should hire you as a coach, not just a speaker. So, it's so often it's really like things that they are bringing to the table and saying, hey, this is where I know I struggle. And a lot of it is me just listening for things and saying, oh, that maybe seems like a bit of an outlier to what they said they wanted. And so a lot of times I'm just making a lot of mental notes and physical notes of just like, okay, she wants to start an Instagram feed for her dog, but yet she has this other whole business idea. Let me just ask a question about the dog thing and just see where that fits in. And maybe then say, well, I don't know if that's aligning with where you're taking the other ideas. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? So it's a lot of it's very sort of like listening and then asking questions.
You say you want to do this, and then you also said you want to do that. How does this fit into that?
Exactly. Yeah.
So how do you help people sort of articulate what it is that they want?
It's really interesting. I think this is, all of us coaches or people that go into this industry, I think we all bring something very sort of unique to the partnerships and the collaborations we have with our clients. And I think that one of mine is an ability to kind of co-create not just ideas, but the articulation of those ideas with my people in real time. So they're talking and I'm synthesizing, and a lot of times I'm writing down the things as well, and I'm speaking it back to them, and we kind of like wizard it up together. So a lot of times I'll say to a client, and this again kind of goes into that sort of bit more awareness about different people's different processing and acting, action styles. So for example, if I know I've got someone who's a verbal processor and they're never going to take a note in their life, and I know they're never going to go back and look at the transcript, and it's like they don't even know where this thing lives on their Google Drive, then I might say to them, hey, you talk, I'll type. And then we'll kind of go back and forth together, and then I'll literally write it and we'll craft it together, and then I'll just pop it in their folder or email it to them or whatever it is. So I feel like it's a synthesizing, co-creative, collaborative experience. It really depends on the person how that rolls out.
It's in my coaching process, one of the things that I always sort of tell people in my groups is the idea that when you come into the group, sometimes people have a certain idea of what they want to do. And then as we start kind of getting into it, the layers of the onion start peeling back. And then a realization of, oh, this is actually what I need to be working on.
Yes.
Well, what would you say people come in to work with you? What do they think they need? And then
yes.
What do you find is there like I know it's a generalization, but is there like what you find they actually need?
Yes. And that's such a great question, because I'm sure that you have this experience too with your clients. What everyone thinks they need is they think they need to be better at marketing. They think they need a new website. They think they need to get better at sales, when actually what they need is they need a solid positioning, and they need systems and infrastructure. They need to understand the fundamentals of the business and how those components piece together. But for the most part, I would say it's positioning. They need to know who they are, what they do, and why that's different, why it matters. They need to know who their ideal clients are, what they need and what keeps them up at night. And they need to know how do they service them. And that's everything from how they're messaging to them, but also how do I deliver this thing? What does it look like? What does it cost? What's my capacity? All of those things. So people think they need marketing and sales help, and really what they need is positioning help.
What are the kind of questions that you will ask someone to help them identify what is that, unique value proposition, that position?
I usually, and actually it's funny, it's, like most coaches, I have a process and a way of working, but it's always going to be tailored to the person. So depending on who the person is, I'll either start with who they are or who their client is. Sometimes we need to see the person we want to serve reflected back to us first. And sometimes we need to say, no, this is what's really important to me. And then I'll find the people who need that. So if we were starting with, which is where we usually start, which is the person themselves, one of the big questions I will ask is, what would you do all day for free?
Mm.
What comes so easily to you that you can't believe everybody else can't do it? Because those two things are usually the thing that they should be charging handsomely for, and that they practically give away because they think it's so easy.
It's a great question and framework. I think that for so many people, they don't realize that when when other people reflect back to you what you're doing is really, extraordinary. And if your sort of initial reaction to that reflection is sort of this like deflection of like, no, it's not a big deal. Like, you're on your gift. Like that's where your gifts are. It's like when something is wow to others and is like a no biggie easy to you, like you're in your zone of genius, right?
Yes.
And I think that's such an important thing for people to recognize. So for listeners to really, really think like, where have you gotten this feedback in your life that you've wowed people and you think it's a no big deal? Like, slow down there. Like, take a little more stock there and see how can we really accentuate what you're doing if it is the thing that you would choose to do for free. Or another framework I've heard kind of similar to that is, what do you do when you're procrastinating?
Oh, that's a great one.
Right? Because it's like, what if that's something that can help out you make some money?
Yes. Yes. Right. And it's interesting that you use the zone of genius, because I use that a lot when I talk to people. I mean, I don't know where you got yours from, but I got it from the Gay Hendricks Big Leap book. That's where I first heard that term. And I love it because all entrepreneurs, I don't care who you are, we make things so much more complicated than they need to be. We're like, let me find the hardest, most complicated route where I'm going to have to take 1,000 courses and invest tons and tons of money, where I can feel like I have some expertise. Meanwhile, like you say, the thing that's like falling off a log to you is you just have not packaged it. You have not turned it into something that people can say, yes, I would like that. That is a solution to a challenge I have.
How often do you see clients just kind of collecting different certifications and different like going through the programs?
Procrastination,
right? It's like, oh, I'm not ready yet. I need these letters after my name, or I need this other certification, then I'll be ready.
And by the way, I do that too, right? I think that like imposter syndrome is something that is so common, and I think it's one of those things that I think women feel it a lot. And I think that neurodivergent folks are going to feel it a lot because, neither of those two groups are sort of traditionally in the top of the heap, where it's like you can just get by with, I don't know, confidence and good looks.
So from your work, what have you seen to be sort of unique about the ADHD entrepreneur versus the neurotypical entrepreneur?
I think a lot of the things that make sense for an ADHD entrepreneur kind of run counter to the typical advice that gets given to entrepreneurs.
Okay, like what?
So, for example, I have one client. She does beautiful textile designs and she's an artist. And before she got her diagnosis, she was at some kind of a fine art class or something, and she just couldn't get started for whatever reason. And so the teacher said to her, which I think was kind of genius, and I'm like, I wish I'd thought of that. He said, start on 3 things. And she started on 3 things, and that got her out of the gate. And so she knows that actually to have a few different things going at once is actually really good for her.
It's almost like you need a little bit extra. Yeah, like you need a little bit of the extra stimulation, and sort of like that there's like this performance like inverse U curve of like, if you don't have enough pressure, it's hard to do anything. But also if you have too much pressure, it's also hard to do anything. So it's like trying to find that like the Goldilocks amount of pressure, like the just right amount. And maybe for someone with ADHD, it looks like a little bit more than someone who maybe thinks more linearly and has, all right, I'm going to do this one thing, and I know steps A to Z. Like, yes, because I don't think any ADHD entrepreneurs ever said that.
No, no, exactly. I would say I'm a linear thinker that speaks non-linear thinking, but, I will certainly gravitate when I choose coaches. I will certainly gravitate to the ones that it is linear and it's almost like Tetris, right? And so when I read their books, it makes perfect sense to me. You start with a goal and then you chunk it down to a project and then you put it in the calendar and then you work on the steps and you just keep working through the steps until you get to the end. That works fine for me. But I know full well I'll now be reading one of those books and thinking, oh gosh, this would never work for my clients. Like they'll want it to work, but it won't. And so how do we give enough structure so it's not just a free-for-all, but have enough flexibility and options in there? Because I think, there's also there's a pressure piece that you're talking about, but there's also the novelty piece, right? Which is no one wants to do the grunt work, the messy middle of a project. No one. I don't care where you are on the neurotypical and neurodivergent scale. Like none of us like the messy middle, right? But if you've got something that's still at that kind of sexy ideas, I'm just riffing stage, then it may just loosen up the actual thing that you're trying to get done. Or maybe it'll take you in a different direction. And that was really the thing. So that's one thing. And, and actually this same client, this is kind of a funny story, but she was having a sale for her items and it was an in-person sale. We got on a call for one of our sessions, maybe it was like Thursday or something. And she said, oh, I'm so terrible. I didn't do that budgeting worksheet that you gave me. And I should have been doing it this morning and I didn't. And she was really just like beating up on herself. And so I said, well, first of all, don't worry about it. Second, what were you doing this morning? And she said, well, I was taking photos of my products and I was coming up with an email campaign and writing a newsletter because I've got this sale coming up on Saturday. And I said, screw my budget worksheet. You focused on the thing that you should have been focusing. That was exactly the right thing to do in the moment. We can come back to it. Maybe we'll do it together. Maybe we'll find another way to talk about the money and the budgeting piece. But there's a level of wisdom in there too, if we can trust our instincts.
One of the things that I find, and I would talk about a lot in my my coaching groups, is people with ADHD, we tend to our natural inclination is to be a firefighter. However, most of the stuff that we are dealing with is not an actual fire, or if it is a fire, it's not our fire. And sometimes certain fires need to be just let to burn, right?
Yeah.
That's why I tell people don't check your email first thing in the morning because that client emergency, is that their emergency or is that your emergency, right? So because we the idea of just understanding tendencies is so important, right? Because if we understand that, we can have a pause if we know that a certain tendency isn't as helpful for us versus ones that are. So for me, it used to be that my tendency was I was a firefighter, right?
Yeah.
And I realized how often I was doing this and I was not getting to my own personal goals. And so I kind of flipped the script and I just took the approach that I'm going to get it wrong sometimes, but I'm getting it wrong a lot right now. Right.
Yeah.
So by this idea of earning the right to work on something that is not important, but not urgent, you got to do the important, but not urgent stuff first before addressing the fires, because so many fires are just bright, shiny objects and don't actually need our attention right now.
Absolutely. And, it's a bit like, if you don't run your finances, someone else will run them for you. If you don't run your own attention, someone else will run it for you, right? I love that. I can't remember where I heard it. It was a woman on a podcast. It was the 10% Happier podcast. But she talked about focus like a flashlight. And, if you're walking home in the dark and you've got your flashlight trained on the pavement in front of you and you hear a branch snap behind you, you're going to turn around and take the flashlight with you. And, so your attention kind of follows where you look. And I loved that idea of you can bring it back, but it will go wherever the branch cracking, AKA someone about to hit you over the head, right, is. And so I love the idea of knowing that our attention will wander, our focus will wander, it will get drawn to the thing that's kind of most dramatic at that moment or seizing our attention. But we get to say, it's still my flashlight and I'm still going to just put it back on the thing as soon as I can.
Well, speaking of things that are timely and urgent, we do need to take a quick break. But when we come back, we will continue this conversation. So we will be right back with Justine Clay. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from our award-winning intensive coaching and accountability groups. Learn more and get your name added to our spring interest list so you can join us for our upcoming registration event tomorrow, February 28th at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. How? By going to coachingrewired.com. Where is one area in your life right now that you've been wanting to gain momentum on, but have felt stuck in one place for too long? Where do you want to be as you keep moving through the year so you can make 2024 your best year yet? What would it mean for you if you could create a roadmap with actionable checkpoints and not have to create it alone? If you're ready to learn new skills or enhance the strategies you already have to live better with your ADHD, get supportive accountability from like-brained people just like you, and you're ready to create your new roadmap to move closer to your biggest goals, join us. We'll be starting our spring season on April 11th. So why not get a head start to begin making big changes to your life and make it amazing? Don't wait. Make an investment in yourself, get started, and experience the ADHD Rewired difference. That's coachingrewired.com to get your name added to our spring interest list so you can join us for our next spring registration event tomorrow, February 28th at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. One more time. That's coachingrewired.com. All right, and we are back. All right, so Justine, we were talking a little bit about helping people identify what their area of focus is, kind of thinking about prioritization and, not just following the thing that's on fire or the shiny object or the breaking branch behind you. It's like, what is the predetermined, which is, hard for a lot of us because we're responders. It's why we see so much ADHD in, emergency response professions. Having a goal that requires, the sticking with it, right? When there are going to be periods when you're pursuing a big goal that are boring or hard, or you get stuck and getting stuck sucks, right? It's like when you want to be making forward motion, but you're not sure what to do. So how do you help people kind of navigate that? And the goal isn't the immediate response to something, but something that might take months to build out or even longer.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where, longer term coaching relationships are really helpful, right? And my program starts at 6 months and people can finish there or come back later, or they can continue for a little bit longer, or as long as they want to, in fact, for that reason, right? Because sometimes people start to see me kind of like a business partner that they can outsource to by that point. At the beginning, they came to me as a coach to help them figure out what are the fundamentals of my business? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I for? How do I serve them? And once they've got that there, they realize, oh, I can meet with her every 2 weeks and we can reorient to what we're working on. We can deal with and address those things that are going to come in. Like you can say, oh, I've got 3 priorities for this quarter, and then an opportunity lands on your lap. And it's like, no, we actually should jump on that. That's something that's worth seizing because that could open up something else. So to have someone or a group of people, it doesn't have to only be a coach, right? It could be, I know you do, your group programs. I know you have the body doubling. I don't know if you call it that, but
the study hall. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And so for folks who maybe aren't in a position to invest in coaching, there are so many options to just build your own accountability group. I had an accountability group from when I first started my business, and it was just 4 other people or 3 other people who were also doing their own thing. And we would meet every week or sometimes just once a month. And we would just talk about, what do you have going on? What do you need help with? In my first business at 2006, I started it. We would meet in person at some funny little diner in New York City. And one of the guys was a musician who also was really great with spreadsheets. And he helped me come up with my first CRM, in Excel, and he just built it out for me. So I think that for me, the advice would always be in community with other people who are doing what you're doing. And as diverse as those communities can be, the better. You don't necessarily need a bunch of photographers because they're all going to be kind of talking about the same things and probably rehashing the same bad solutions, right?
I'm glad that you said that too, because one of the things that I've seen over the years with my my coaching and accountability program, as we try to create these really strong sort of accountability teams within the groups, we created these rubrics and tried to figure out what combination of sort of whether it's personality types or like a stage in life and what we found is that none of that really matters. The most important thing we find is that they meet together and then they can meet at the same time. And so when we sort of shifted to that, we're just going based on schedules. We put these teams together. I'm like, I'm not sure if this team's going to work. We have someone who's just finishing college, or this person is just starting retirement, and they're trying to figure out and what we find is the more diversity of life that we have within a team, the more productive these teams tend to be.
Yes, absolutely. 1000%. Because it also sort of, I think for all of us, especially if you're working on your own, which a lot of us are, or we're working in very small teams, you don't have that diversity of thought and input and feedback. So we tend to circle around a problem in sort of slightly varying ways. But when you have someone come in with a completely different experience and even ideologies, where they live geographically, all of these things, they're going to say something that just kind of unlocks that stuckness in your head and also just adds real value. There's so much value in a room full of people trying to get something done.
Let's shift gears a little bit to talk about mindset.
Yeah.
What do you see as some of the kind of common sort of mindset hurdles that show up for entrepreneurs with ADHD?
I think a lot of it is those very deep grooves of I'm a flake, I never follow through on things, I'm so disorganized. I think a lot of it is really a lot of negative self-talk about their ability to get things done. That's something where entrepreneurship is hard enough without beating up on ourselves before the day has even started, right? And then the other big one, which it's not even anything to do with folks who have ADHD. This is just across the board with creative entrepreneurs and freelancers. They all think they're bad at business. They all think they're bad with money. And they all think creativity and business and money are just never the twain shall meet. And that's in both of those examples, this was just messaging we all received if we were in that way inclined. And it wasn't really supported for the most part. And so we've all been kind of swimming upstream, figuring it out, cobbling together whatever we can as we go along. And so a lot of times just the confidence and the sort of self-assuredness that you kind of know what you're doing. It's okay. You've got it. That's a lot of times not consistent with what I'm actually seeing, which is oh my God, you're doing such amazing things. Look at this thing that you've done. You know what I mean?
So let me ask you this then, when in that kind of conversation with someone, how often do you get then that sort of response from the client? Yeah, okay, so I've done that, but I'm sure I'm going to screw it up soon. Something's going to happen.
Yes.
That perpetual feeling the house of cards is going to fall down.
Yes. I know that there's a lot of coach training that will say you shouldn't talk about yourself, you shouldn't share opinions. I would say I'm definitely a cross between a coach and a consultant in that I will share an opinion and a thought, but I'm also a human being. And so when someone says that to me, I'm just can I have your permission to share a quick story? And I'll tell them if something comes up. I don't always have a story, but often I do, of just when I felt like that, or when I overcame something like that, or when a client, and of course I'll never use a client's name or anything like that, but I'll oftentimes just, instead of just saying, oh no, you're doing great, I'll try and give them a really concrete example of how we all feel that way. And it always passes. And if someone says, well, I could try this and I could fail, and I'm like, you could, and you probably will some of the time. That's part of the deal. We can't get to choose certain parts of entrepreneurship and not take the other parts. That comes with the territory.
I think it's that sort of perpetual feeling of what's going to be the next thing I screw up? Or
yes,
I've been doing online business now for this is my 10th year with ADHD Rewired. And while I have a good track record of, building stuff and growing the business, and that sort of little voice in the back of my mind that goes, all right, what are you going to forget to do that's going to make this whole thing that I've built over this last decade just crumble down? And it's like
overnight.
I mean, and I noticed that thought. I'm just like, wow, like that really, like it's a sneaky one, right? It's because
it's sneaky.
And so it's like not so much of how do we not have those thoughts. It's how do we just notice those thoughts and just take it for what it is. And it's just like the noise in our brain and from the stories and the messages we've gotten growing up, that like it's almost that idea of like with like teachers. When we tell teachers, when you have a kid with ADHD in your classroom, don't tell them, like the kid when they've done something well, see, I knew you could do it. Which seems very counterintuitive, because it's like, well, isn't that giving them the positive? It's like, well, not when you have ADHD. Because when you have ADHD, we don't always know when our brain's going to be cooperating with us. So we don't always know when we can do it. So it's really getting more specific and say what worked.
I think that's a really good point. And as you were talking, that was what was coming up in my head. I think there's a 1-2 kind of punch to this, right? Where let's say there's a like, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, when will I blah, blah, blah. And that's like that sort of very practiced story that we have about ourselves, right? And I say to that, and I'll reference Gay Hendricks again. I've never referenced him so much in my life in 1 hour, but there you go. He says, put a drop of love on it. It sounds like so kind of like hokey and like you should embroider that on a pillow somewhere. But I like the idea of it, where it's just like, just put a drop of love on it. Like there's a little bit of pain there, put a drop of love. And then, and this is like the sort of, I'm a Pisces with a Virgo rising. So there's a very sort of dreamy and very practical component to me. And so the practical component would be like, what are you actually afraid could happen? What's the worst that could happen? Let's say you're doing a launch for whatever, and you're just like, I'm going to screw it all up. Well, what could actually go wrong? Let me just write down all of these things that could go wrong. And then a lot of times it's just like, it's the equivalent of the boogeyman under the bed, right? Like you've listed all of the things. And then literally we could look at them and say, what's within our power to mitigate that going wrong? Right? So I think a lot of times it's really just like, put the drop of love on it, but that's not enough on its own. That just kind of takes the edge off that sort of negative feeling towards ourselves and that compassion. But then just the actionable component, which is what really is the worst that can happen. You know, there's that, I read a really great article in the New York Times years ago about the value of negative thinking. We all get told the value of positive thinking, but actually asking what's the worst that could happen, and then saying, what would I do in that scenario?
And then it's very helpful. It's taking that worry thought and actually, like, I think so many people just like, they have that, oh, well, I'm afraid this is going to happen. Okay, like keep thinking through that.
Yeah.
And if that did happen, what could you do?
Yeah.
Like, could you deal with that? I'm not saying you would like it, but could you deal with it? And for almost every scenario we're going to be in, the answer is yes. Like we could deal with it.
Yes. And here's another thing. We've all got to this ripe old age that we are, and we're still here. So that means we survived 100% of things that happen to us. Why, when we are this age, this experienced, this resourced, this supported, why would it suddenly go wrong now?
Brains are funny, and it's trying to protect us in ways that are not actually helping us. And I think that's going back to tendencies, right? It's like, I have this tendency to, worry about this, that, or the other thing. Okay. Yeah. What does my track record show though? Right?
Yes. And that's when we start to coach ourselves, right? Like, when was a time when everything went to hell in a handbasket and I prevailed? When is a time that happened? Just our little sort of like our lap, our what's it called? A victory lap. Those things, we can coach ourselves in those moments too.
Do you find that, and I don't know if it's more of an entrepreneur thing or maybe an ADHD thing, one of the, say, what's your superpower? For me, I view it as like being a lemonade maker. Like, I'm really good at like taking lemons and turning them into lemonade. Like, here's this shitty thing that I didn't want to have happen or didn't expect to have happen. Okay, how can I actually make this thing that I was not anticipating, that I was hoping wouldn't happen? And how can I actually shift that and change that into something positive? Do you find that more so or any like differently in entrepreneurs with ADHD versus those without?
If I were to guess, which is what I could do, I would say probably a little bit more because, as you know, folks who have ADHD have had to figure out workarounds their whole life. So
Yeah.
they are naturally much better at getting themselves through very, very challenging experiences where there isn't a whole lot of support or people are saying things that aren't true about their potential or their ability or their intelligence or all of these things. So I do think that, like, as awful as that is to experience, especially as a child, it does give you a certain level of like, I'll show you, and a certain level of resilience where it's just like, well, I guess I'm going to have to just figure this out because that's what I have to do. And the more times, going back to what we were just talking about, the more times we figure something difficult out, the more evidence we have that, like, bring it on. I don't want to deal with the bad stuff, but if you do, it's okay. I'll figure it out.
Many years ago, I was it was my ex-wife's cousin who was like helping me organize my office at my home office. And I had these like nice little notes from clients and like in different random piles. And I don't know what to do with this stuff. Like I don't want to get rid of it. It's nice. Like it feels good to look at it. So she's like, well, what if we just create a folder that's called "You Are Awesome"?
Yeah.
It was just this, she was 17 years old at the time, her cousin, and had this idea. And I was like, that's actually really powerful because I find for myself, and I think so many people with ADHD can relate to this, the years and years and years of negative messaging, like it's still there,
Yes.
right? No matter how much work we've done on ourselves, it's still there. So I think having that place that we can look at, or those people who we can just ask for that, like, tell me what you see that I'm doing well, like, which is, I think we're taught that like we shouldn't ask questions like that to people because that's like sounds weird. But I think that when we recognize, okay, like the way our lives have unfolded because of having ADHD, we've had a shit ton of negative messaging.
Yep.
So if we have a little band of cheerleaders that can like reflect back to us, say, hey, like you're doing this and it's awesome, and that helps. I said, do it and don't apologize for wanting that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I think I think just as something that's just so nice to just as a human being incorporate into your life anyway. Like I was on a group text with some friends of mine, and I've been friends with them ever since I've been in the States, which is like 1,000 years. And I said, what are you, do you have resolutions? What are you doing next year? And one of them, he's in his late 50s now, and he said, I'm going to take care of health things. What's yours? And so I said what mine was. And I said, well, what kind of health things are you going to take care of? And that was like an extra step. I didn't have to ask it, but I was like, ask the follow-up question. And he said, well, I need to get my eyes checked. I need to get my hearing checked. And I know that, like, I'm so embarrassed to even say that because you'll all say, what about time? Because in our 30s, he'd be in the bar with his hand like cupped by his ear. I mean, he's got terrible hearing. And I said to him, it doesn't matter. Like, don't be embarrassed. It's great that you're doing it. It doesn't matter when you do it. It just matters that you are doing it. And that was just a moment it was an opportunity that was so easy for me to give something that would have just relieved feelings of embarrassment that may stop him from getting health checks that would be valuable, right?
We do need to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm interested to know if there are things that you have seen as a pattern of people with ADHD who are entrepreneurs. Are there things that you see that people put off more often than others? And how do we help with that kind of issue? So let's take a quick break, and then we'll get to that after the break. We will be right back. All right, ADHD Rewired listeners, it is time for another ad for a product that this one, I think we could also say, really glad doesn't exist. Do you find yourself constantly racing against time only to discover that time is an Olympic sprinter and you're, well, not? Introducing the revolutionary solution to all your time management woes, the endless deadline clock, crafted in the depths of the procrastinator's psyche. Hey, I feel called out on that. This marvel of modern engineering is designed to keep you on your toes and your adrenaline pumping. Why settle for a mundane 24-hour day when you can experience the thrill of unpredictability? With our patents, oh shit, not that word again. With our patented, with our patented with our patented time warp technology, the endless deadline clock randomly accelerates or decelerates, making each second an adventure. 1 minute, you'll have all the time in the world, and the next, your deadline is now. Gone are the days of leisurely sipping coffee while pondering the meaning of life. With the endless deadline clock, every moment is a desperate dash to the finish line. Will you make it? Only time will tell. Literally. Oh wait, there's a twist. Just when you think you can't possibly meet your deadline, our Miracle Minute feature kicks in, stretching the last minute before your task is due into what feels like an hour. The ultimate test of your time management skills. And for those who thrive under pressure, our exclusive deadline roulette mode randomly selects one of your upcoming deadlines and shortens it without warning. Think of it as a fun surprise that keeps your productivity levels interesting. Worried about missing out on life's little moments? Fear not. The endless deadline clock also comes with life's little reminders, gentle nudges to eat, sleep, and maybe even socialize. Because what's life without a little balance and chaos? Join the legion of thrill-seeking time benders today. Visit endlessdeadlineclock.com and use the promo code It Doesn't Actually Matter, because this doesn't actually exist. And while time doesn't always feel real, you know what is real? The support you can get here at ADHD Rewired. Whether it's our coaching groups, our co-working community at adultstudyhall.com, our Patreon community, our free Facebook community, our live Q&As, and everything else that we do here, go to ADHDrewired.com for real support. And now, back to the show. All right, we are back. So in the work that I've done, I think one of the sort of most dreaded things that I've seen people put off for years is their taxes. And I've had many people in our community who said they hadn't filed their taxes in years.
Yes. Yeah.
How much do you see this, and how do you help people sort of get themselves caught up and sort of address this and pull their head out of the sand?
I see it a lot. So anyone that's in this, group of people, no shame, no blame. It just is what it is. But we have choices, right? So if I could back up a little bit, one of the significant components of my work is helping people build profitable creative businesses, not just businesses that make money, but they are profitable, and which means also that you're working within capacity, right? Lots of things that come into that. And so, of course, we have to address money. We have to address pricing. We have to address, capacity, boundaries. All of these things kind of come in with the money. And I do find that creatives, and especially those who have ADHD, the whole money piece of it is it's just like a hot button issue for them. I definitely had my own money journey and money story. So I come at it, I come to the whole topic with a lot of compassion, with a lot of experience, with a lot of those like human stories where I can say, I know exactly what you mean, and let's talk about that. So a lot of times I think where I always start with folks is, let's look at where we are. And I remember when I heard a piece of advice when I was going through my own money stuff, years and years ago. And it was a guy who was a finance coach, and he worked with business coaches, particularly life coaches, I think, but in the kind of $1 million range. He was on some webinar and he said something that just blew my mind. And he said, when I work with my clients, I always say to them, I don't care what the number says. I don't care if it's in the red. I don't care if it's in the black. I don't care what that number is. It says nothing about you. It says nothing about who you are. It says nothing about your character. It says nothing about your potential. It says nothing, nothing, nothing. It's just a number. I'm less interested in how can we budget our way to you being in the black, to how can we figure out what your services and products are that we can sell that are going to make you the money that you need to make. And to me, that was such a refreshingly new way to look at it. It's like, it doesn't matter what the number says. It doesn't mean anything. It's literally just a number on a computer somewhere, but it's information. And without that information, we can't do anything because it's a boogeyman under the bed. And that's another reason why I think being in a relationship with a coach who has expertise and experience in this area is so helpful, because it's so scary and triggering to look at that stuff because you're so embarrassed and you don't know where everything is. And sometimes you just need someone who's going to say, I'm going to be in the Zoom session with you and we're going to find these things together. And maybe we're going to find someone on Upwork that can get you set up in FreshBooks or HoneyBook or whatever. I'm a big fan of having some kind of a system and someone to get you set up in that system. Not QuickBooks, it's too complicated. There are so many easy ones that you're not going to hate life. And also managing expectations and saying to them, listen, for us to get out of this hole, it's going to be kind of gross. There's going to be some digging. You're going to have to do it under your nails. No one's going to have any fun, but I'm here with you. But once we have it all good and set up, you're going to feel so good because your bookkeeping is going to take you 10 minutes every 2 weeks.
So thinking about like the deepest hole that maybe someone that you've worked with has been in, how long would you say it took to get out of that hole?
I don't know if I can think of someone specifically, but I can speak to myself.
Okay.
And when I was just starting this business, I had the other business, I was just starting this business. So it was new, it was not making, that much money. Then we moved, we bought a house. I had a kid, the one we've been talking about. We moved to a different state. So I changed the business entity. There was a drop in my income. My husband got made redundant during that time. And I had a tax bill of maybe $10,000, which I'd never had before. I had all of this, notices from all the time, all these IRS notices. It was so awful. And I had this accountant and I said to her, you and I need to figure out a plan to get me back in good standing. I need to be on a payment plan. I need to know what to do when all these things come in. And she said, okay, it's going to take us a year and you're going to hate it. But every time you get a notice, you send it to me. Like you literally just take a picture, email it to me. We're going to come up with a payment plan for everything. And you're just going to have to dig out slowly. But it was really all of these notices and confusion. Like, don't tell me to call the IRS. Like, no one wants to do that. They're actually much nicer than you think they're going to be. They're actually quite pleasant. But, no one's going to actually get to that point because they're not going to want to do it. So I would say it probably took me a year to get in good standing where I was just like, I'm good. And I'll tell you what, after that experience, I was like, I will never do that again because it was painful. And it took, one of the things I always say in my money webinars is a moment spent worrying about money is a moment that you've stolen from yourself, where you could have been working on your unique brilliance, where you could have been delivering your brilliance to someone who could really benefit from it, from you being compensated for that brilliance. So anything we can do to not let money worries rob us and rob the people that we support, it's worth doing. So there's no silver bullet. There's no, the only way out is through. Yeah. But I would say you need proper support. You need a professional, and you need someone who's going to say, this is what it looks like. This is how we're going to do it together. This is your part in it.
So what would you recommend that, so someone with ADHD, an entrepreneur, is, they're getting overwhelmed by the financial pieces of their business. What would you say would be helpful for them when they're seeking maybe a financial professional? Because in my experience, I find that working with financial professionals have often made me feel, for lack of better words, dumb.
Yes. Yep. Yes, I agree. And I think now there are a whole bunch more financial professionals for creatives, for people who are really tailored to our kind of people. And I would guarantee, or I will bet my hat, that if you someone, Googled financial advisor for ADHD creatives, you'd find someone. I bet you any money. I'd say look for someone who will meet you where you are, because money is just like anything else, right? Like if you're looking for a money coach, that should be no different from if you're looking for a business coach, or if you're looking for a life coach, or you're looking for a healthcare provider. You're going to say, does this person understand my needs? Do they care about who I am? Do they understand like what I even do and where I'm going? And, I think sometimes when we are looking for an advisor, we put them in the power position. We assume that we're lucky that they're helping us and we just give them all our money to do it. Whereas like you're interviewing them. Do they get the job or not? Right. And we don't tend to do that in positions that we put people in an authority position, even though they don't really deserve to be in an authority position. They just do stuff that you don't know how to do.
And one of the lines that I like to use when talking to a financial professional, because I've been through a few, and I tell them I need stuff explained Sesame Street simple.
Yes.
Like if you're going to use an acronym, define it.
Yep.
If you're going to explain a concept, tell me a story, use a metaphor to help me understand it, because I need to understand it deeply. So I'm with you on this. Like otherwise, like if you start talking about stuff I don't get, and I feel you're just flying through it, all I'm hearing is womp, womp, womp. And I'm just like, okay, well, I had that meeting and I have just no idea what I'm doing next now. Like,
yeah.
And if that's how you're feeling, it's like, it's time to maybe find another professional.
Agreed. And what I really like about what you just said, though, is that you know what your needs are and that you can articulate them up front and say, and I think to take that maybe one step further is that something you legitimately can do? And secondly, my takeaway has to be 3 actionable steps, no more, no less. If there's something I have to take, I'm going to need a resource, and I'm going to need the link to that resource right in the document. I want a 1-page document at the end with steps that I can check off, and that's what I need. Like you can even say, like, this is what I need as a deliverable, right? I just, this is obviously not financial stuff, but I just worked with an SEO person, and it turns out she had ADHD, and we had a good old laugh about, how she was helping me with my SEO. And I was able to actually ask her a bunch of questions as well. But how she delivered the roadmap, SEO is one of those very complicated things too, that like no one really wants to do. But she literally delivered a checklist, very short. And she did the Loom video where she explained what it was. And then we had a Google, the checklist was in Google, so we could go back and forth with questions. She told me what my support would be, what that looked like. It was so easy and helpful. So that's something that we can say to them, this is what I need. Or is that something you can deliver? And even that feedback from someone, like that's great client information for these people, right? They could say, oh, what a great idea. That'll be my deliverable from now on, right? We're all collaborating.
You mentioned Loom, and I don't think we've talked about this on the podcast at all. But I think it's a great resource for entrepreneurs and for anyone else who's doing anything on the computer, or they would like to be able to hand it off to somebody else. It's a simple video recording tool where you just create a screencast of what you're doing and talk while you're doing it. And it creates a link and done, right?
It's amazing. I use it all the time. It's great for verbal processes. It's great. Someone can go back and watch it again and again. I think they even do it with transcripts now. We were talking about systems, just touched on it, but like that's something like we all have systems in our life and our business, whether they're intentional or not is something else. But one of the things that really stops ADHD entrepreneurs from growing is like the whole standard operating procedures. Like no one wants to do it, right? No one wants to train someone. But if it was just like, okay, when you're doing something that you would like someone else to be doing, instead of just doing it, while you're doing it, record a Loom. I did this and I do this and I do this, and you can put the link to where the thing lives, and you've just created a standard operating procedure.
You know what I found that's also helpful for things like when you have to do, say, like file your quarterly taxes in your business. Doing something once every quarter, it's like having to figure it out all over again for the first time every quarter, right? It's like if I could do every week, I could figure it out. If it's every quarter, I was like, oh, am I supposed to do this? I was like, I don't even remember. So I've created a Loom to remind myself about how to do that.
That's such a smart idea. I think I'm going to do the same thing because I've got my taxes coming up too, and and it's the same thing. I'm just like, oh god, I'm going to try and find out where that thing is, But even a template of like, we create like a template for putting in all of the expenses. Why is that just not a template instead of something we recreate every year?
Yeah. How often are we reinventing the wheel? And that's, the,
Yeah.
I mean, one of the fun things for me about, I think, just having my own business is that we could figure out ways to systemize stuff to make things easier, to make things potentially unnecessary to even do. And, I think one of the challenges is, and this is something that I would say I used to be really awful at, and I've gotten significantly better, is the issue of communicating to somebody else what it is that you want to do,
Yes.
right? Because it's like we have the ideas in our head, but
Yeah.
getting those out so people can understand what that vision is, it's not easy.
How do you do it?
I think part of it is the experience of like, after so many times of having someone create something, I was like, how did they think that's what I wanted? And feeling frustrated, and then realizing that like, oh yeah, I actually wasn't very clear on that. And so like having like that experience as like the I guess being motivated by pain avoidance, right? And I think one of the things that actually helped me realize that I'm actually not that bad at creating these things was my current executive assistant, who I've had now for about 2 years, is I think is the first employee that I've had that I felt like I actually did a decent job with training. And because part of it is the previous person I had, the training process was, all right, sit next to me for the first month and we'll, right? Which is like, I mean, if you're just starting out, that can work, but that is not an efficient way to do it.
It's not osmosis.
No. And when I started getting into all the things that I was doing, and then like slowing down and doing the Loom video, and then like using the Loom video to then create the written documentation to kind of go through it myself, and then it's seeing, oh wait, I missed a step there, and I was finding that it was kind of fun in like a weird way, because part of it was I was finding ways to do these things in a more efficient manner, and to me, like, if I could find areas where I'm saving time or saving money, I like that.
There's a nice little shot of dopamine right there.
That's right.
Right? I do the same thing. I look at something, I'm like, how can I remove 3 steps? And it's almost like a game. It's like you start to sort of gamify the process, and then like you remove a step and it works so much better. And it's so much simpler. And you're just like, yes.
You mentioned the shot of dopamine too. And I think the other thing that gives you a big shot of dopamine is having this idea of something that you really want to do, not being sure if you have the ability to do it, but going for it anyways, and being able to go, holy shit, I did that.
That's right.
Right. And, I often tell people if I had a crystal ball 10 years ago that can see where I'm at right now, I would think there's something is wrong with this crystal ball, because like there's no way that's actually real. Right.
That's right.
And so where I want to go, part of me feels like, is that even possible? It's hard to imagine. But I also know that I felt that before, and have created something that I wasn't sure was possible. Right?
Tell me, where do you want to go?
Where do I want to go? I want to continue to grow our coaching offerings. I want to be a little bit more of an advisor within the business as we bring in more coaches, and create more sort of media channels of different podcasts and TikTok and whatnot. And I want to do more speaking. And that's like, to me, I love speaking. I love that the energy of an audience.
Yes.
When you see things connecting, when like it all just kind of comes together, like to me, that is, I don't know, that's my high.
Agreed.
It's exciting. It's really exciting when you give people those ideas, those frameworks, when you see those light bulbs kind of going off. So that's kind of what's next. And like also like energy management. I'm coming up now on a decade of ADHD Rewired, and I haven't had too many breaks. And I love what I do, but needing real like brain breaks is a real thing. And I think that's something that I'm probably going to be talking a lot more about over the next year or so on the podcast is burnout.
Yeah.
Because you can still like feeling burnt out doesn't mean you don't still love what you do.
That's right.
It's just like we need rest. And, it's sort of like this idea of like, I'm just going to, burn the candle on both ends because I'll sleep when I'm dead, which is such a toxic way to think because
It totally is.
that vision of sleeping when you're dead is going to come a lot sooner if that's the way you're living,
Yes.
right?
And the actual, like, when you're not dead is going to be a lot less fulfilling as well, because you're going to feel terrible. I don't know if you've ever read the book Burnout by Amelia and Emily Nagoski.
Yes, my therapist
love
a
it.
couple of years ago recommended it, and it's we've talked about it too, about the whole idea about completing the stress cycle and like and dealing
emotion needs motion.
Yes, and it's not just about like get rid of the stress in life. Like that's actually not how you deal with burnout. It's like it's dealing with the stress, so like how you process physical stress, right?
Yeah. I love the way they gave sort of visuals to it, like thinking of it like a tunnel that you must come out the other side of the tunnel, right? If you stay in, then it becomes internalized. And I just loved it so much. I think they have such a unique take on burnout and voice.
Yeah. And, and my therapist even told me too, she was like, it's written towards women, like, but like anyone can get anything out of it. And
Totally.
I definitely agree with that. Like it is very powerful.
Totally. Hey, Eric, when we were in the break, you asked me if there was one thing we wanted to talk about. There was one thing I just thought of.
All right.
Can I just share that?
You bet.
One of the things that I started doing maybe like 4 or 5 years ago was the morning pages, like a morning journaling practice. And, I don't know if it's because I'm British or my generation, I don't know, but I always just thought like journaling was just ridiculous navel gazing. I was just like, who wants to hear me blah, blah, blaring about like my day? But I tried it after reading The Artist's Way. I was like, I'll give it a shot. And I sort of religiously have done it since then. And I think that is one of the most underrated, underused tools for processing our emotions, processing our ideas, working through an idea, figuring out what the next step is. Like it's knowing, do we need another resource? Do we not? It's such an amazing sort of like mirror that's internal, right? Like, and I think we so often don't tap into the wisdom that is already in us. And this is a great way to do it. And so that's something that, like, when the new year comes around, we're recording this on January 2nd. I don't have any big like, oh, new year, new goals, because I'm constantly going through that processing, mapping, practice that I don't feel like I've got to suddenly like map everything out for the next year. It's a nice little kind of like boost, I suppose. But that's just something that I think also is really fantastic for folks who have ADHD, because they can really coach themselves that way.
I hate that advice and that suggestion.
But
because I have a very love-hate relationship with journaling. I hate doing it.
Tell me more. Why?
Well, the thing that's annoying to me about it is that it's really helpful when I do it, and I hate doing it, which is why I hate this advice, because it's like, I know you're right, but I just hate doing it. I don't know. I think part of it is, and I know it's, there's different kinds of writing, and when you're just kind of journaling for your own expression of thoughts, it is a different style of writing. But I think I just have struggled with writing for so long that I still have some limiting beliefs around my writing. Right.
I think you said something really important there, though, that I don't even see it as writing. I see it as a brain dump. And it's just like, I'm getting all of the shit that's in my head swirling around. And like, we all know for folks with ADHD, there's a lot going on in there. Right. So even just having a place where you can like, get it all out, like bleh, with no structure, no judgment, no anything, even if its only job were just to get it out of your head for 10 minutes, that would be worthwhile. But I have a suggestion, because of the sort of like, I don't want to do it, and I get that, is for me, I connected the doing the morning pages. I do it first thing in the morning when I get up. So I get up before my children, and I do it with my morning cup of coffee. So there are 2 things that I really want time alone before the insanity of the morning starts with my children, and coffee, which I want to mainline immediately. A good, strong cup of coffee. So those 2 things are always coupled. If you said to me, do it after lunch, I'd be like, no, don't wanna. But I've sort of attached them to 2 things that are meaningful, and you can pry that cup of coffee in my morning time out of my cold, dead hand.
Do you type or handwrite your?
I handwrite it. And I have feelings about that, because I think that if handwriting it, and I have one of those remarkable tabs now, which I like, but I used to just buy the cheapest notebooks. But I think if handwriting it is prohibitive, people should absolutely type it if that's better for them. Like do whatever. Like
do
voice memos, whatever, right? But I do think there is something for the way my brain works between the brain-hand connection.
Yeah.
There's some magic that happens in that doesn't happen in other ways. So, but my handwriting is terrible. I mean, someone said to me, well, aren't you worried someone would look at it? And I'm like, A, it's probably the most boring read ever. B, good luck trying to read it because even I can't. So, yeah. So, well, maybe you'll revisit the idea.
Yeah. It's, it's like those two, journaling and like meditation. It's one of those like things I'm on and again and off again on. And it's like,
I know. I feel the same about meditation. I find it very hard.
Yeah. And doing it myself is really hard. Like I used to go to there was like 2 different groups that I went to in my community that I went and then COVID disrupted that. And then, it's like, the things that really pay dividends tend to have just a little bit of a little more challenging of an on-ramp. And I think if we can recognize that, okay, like the easiest thing to do right now isn't going to pay us many dividends, right? And we want to be careful about equating this to like a willpower or just try harder because it's not that.
No, it's not that.
Yeah. I think what's could be really helpful, and I'm kind of verbally processing this myself, is having not the cue necessarily to do the journaling, but the cue for the why. For the why does this matter? What might this help? Right. Yes. And if you've done it before and you experienced the help, then you have evidence of, it helps. So letting that cue include something about the history of, when you've done this before, this helps you do this, that, or the other thing.
Yes. So I'll give you a quick, and then I know I need to let you go, a quick just example of that. So I was writing the pages, and this was like years ago, so I was pretty early on, and I'm writing, and I'm just like, God, I've got a really busy day. I feel overwhelmed. At that point, I had like a baby as well, and an older kid, and I was just like, and I'm just bitching basically. And I'm just like, and I'd really like to go have a run today, but I'm not going to have time. And then I was writing, I was like, well, I guess you could go and have a run now. I could run now. And it was like dark outside. It was like 6:30. And I was like, okay, I'm going to run now. I literally went upstairs, put my sneakers on and went for a run. It was like pitch black, middle of the winter, 6:30 in the morning. And I wrote myself into my running shoes essentially. So to me, it's almost like you've got this like power of suggestion where it's like, you may just do what you tell yourself to do. Like you may not, but you might, right? And even if that happens like one time out of 100, not bad a return on investment.
Your website is Justine Clay, Justine, Clay, CLAY.com. Justine, thank you so much. This was a really lovely conversation, and I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me. I had a lovely time with you.
And this, my ADHD friends, marks the end of this week's episode. Big thanks to Justine for taking the time to chat with me today. Get in touch with Justine and find all the resources mentioned in today's show by checking out the show notes at the website. That's ADHDrewired.com. Want more ADHD Rewired, like an uninterrupted listening experience of this show and bonus content from past episodes? Consider becoming a patron at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon at $5 a month or more. Need some accountability buddies to finally get laundry done? Finish your last 10% of that project you've been putting off? Or just need some company while taking on your most dreaded tasks? Consider joining the ADHD-friendly body doubling and co-working community at adultstudyhall.com. Not sure what you want to check out first? Well, you can find it all. Our coaching groups, Adult Study Hall, our free Facebook community, our Patreon community, and all ADHD Rewired events and more at ADHDrewired.com. That's ADHDrewired.com. Thank you again, Justine, for joining me for this week's episode, and thank you for making it to the end. And if you love this episode, please share it, and we'll see you back here next week.